Hidely hodly, neighbor, is Mark from Enchantment of Eternity, here to do another Star Trek patron requested video. This video was requested by Kyrie091, who wanted me to talk about some of the behind the scenes creators of Star Trek, and I chose specifically to talk about the writers, because out of all the professions, and maybe I'll do another video eventually about directors and, you know, special effects people or whatever have you, what have you, but the writers to me are probably the most important element of Star Trek. They are what craft Star Trek, make the stories, and can ultimately make the episodes good or bad. So I wanted to talk about some of the most prolific, well-known, either for good or for ill, writers of the 90's era of Star Trek. I don't like calling it the Berman era because, well, as I'll get to shortly, Rick Berman was not very good for this era, so I don't think he deserves it to be named after him. But it goes beyond the 90's. It starts in 88 and goes, or 87 actually. Starts in 87, goes to 2005. So it's more than just 90's Trek, but that's what I'm calling it. The era that goes from TNG to Enterprise. Not covering the original series and not covering modern Trek. And so, yeah. So I'm going to go through some of what I have deemed 22 of the most important writers of that era, and sort of I want to list off some things about them. Sort of most of all of the writers I'm going to get into were on staff at one stage or another, and just to explain how the writing worked for these particular Star Trek shows, if you're not aware, they were crafted in a writer's room, so that there was it wasn't, some people, and I think the original series was like this, but not this era of TV, and I think some people maybe think it's like, they just say, hey, you write a script, and someone goes at home, their typewriter, and writes up a script and brings it in, and they say like, oh, good script, let's film it. Not how it worked. There was a writer's room, and a writer, freelance or on the staff, would pitch an episode, and they say, okay, that sounds like a good idea, let's workshop it. So to get all the writers on staff, and they would sort of sit in the writer's room with a little whiteboard and write little things, and they'd all come up ideas. Hey, what if we do this? Hey, what if we do that? And they'd sort of break down the general outline of the episode, and then the showrunner would point to a writer and go, you write it. And it was more like that. Obviously, that's generalization. Every episodes are different. Some episodes were more collaborative. Some episodes were less collaborative. And so many times these writers on staff would be involved in episodes they're not credited for, because they do have a credit on it officially. It's producer. That's their credit. Producer means they're on staff. And same with the showrunner, who is the executive producer. Sometimes the showrunner or other staff writers would do uncredited rewrites. I mean, this happens from time to time as well. So they're all sort of jumbled and involved. But even so, you do have certain episodes in particular that are sort of crafted to a particular writer's style, shall we say. So you do start to notice as you go through and watch the Star Trek episodes, especially if you're aware and you get used to who wrote each episode, you start to notice distinct styles. And also, I gathered opinions on those styles, and so have pinpointed writers that I believe that I'm more in tune to, that I prefer their writing over others. But as I say, it's sort of a collaborative sort of efforts, so that can be a little bit jumbled from time to time. So I don't think there are there are not any truly like terrible or truly great writers, but I definitely have my leanings. So I'm going to go through a group of writers that I singled out, and I am going to list when they were on staff, because all the ones I chose were on staff at one time or another. What episodes do they have a written by credit for? Now, as I say, I'm not including teleplay or story by, just because it would make the list way too long. I'm focusing on just a written by credit, which is going to leave out a lot of episodes that they are known for, because sometimes they just have a teleplay credit. That just means that, they wrote the actual script teleplay, that filming script, and story by means it kind of came up with the story, but then other people came by and rewrote or whatever. So it's always, again, this is always very lucid from episode to episode. Sometimes written by credit does mean they pretty much had full control of the episode, or other times it could mean that they wrote the initial script, but then the showrunner or someone else came by and rewrote it and had it uncredited. That has happened. So it's always, you never know, but I am keeping the list exclusive to just those episodes where they have a written by credit. Because otherwise the list might be too long. It might give you some sort of sense on what episodes, what their style is and what episodes they work for. And then I'm going to list what that particular writer is known for. And then I'm going to list the pros and cons of that writer. Now, this is very much open to my subjective opinion on this. I will forewarn you. And again, a couple disclaimers I got to give. I know I was not in the writer's room at the time, so I don't know exactly who was responsible for what. I'm just going by the episodes that they're credited for and making, educated guesses on what their styles is based on the final product that they put out, but also going by interviews and hearsay and what people said about the writing process and stuff like that. So it's not a totally clear picture, and so what I'm saying may not be 100% accurate, but it is, to the best of my knowledge, a picture of what these writers were responsible for and what their style is like, and then of course give my personal opinion on how that affected the show for good or for ill or whatnot, or maybe both. I don't know. Anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm not really going to focus on the very first season of TNG, which is mostly TOS writers, like Gene Roddenberry or DC Fontana or David Gerald, because, those are TOS, and I'm focusing more on 90's era. So, let's start with the man himself, Rick Berman. Rick Berman was the producer in charge of Star Trek from Season 2 of TNG up to the end of Enterprise. His written by credits are Brothers, A Matter of Time, Broken Bow, Fight or Flight, Unexpected, Shuttlepod 1, Shockwave Parts 1 and 2, A Night in Sickbay, The Seventh, Vanishing Point, Stigma, Cogenitor, The Expanse, Xindi, The Xindi, 0 Hour, and These Are the Voyages. It should be noted that most of those Enterprise credits was co-written with Brannon Braga. Most of them. I don't know exactly how many. Anyway, what Rick Berman is known for. He's known for being a money man, not understanding story, often interfering with good writing and making bad calls, being a dick to those that work under him, and harassing the actors. Again, this is hearsay. From what I understand. Pros. In his years of Star Trek, he oversaw the ship and, of course, did some things right and held people back from making bad calls, such as Ira Steven Behr, who wanted to end DS9 by revealing the whole show was just a story in Benny Russell's head. Cons. Not understanding story, putting sex appeal above all else, making it so every episode had to have a threat. Not a good writer. I wrote that in capital letters. Not understanding what made Star Trek great. Got too power hungry and greedy after Michael Piller left. So here's the deal with Rick Berman, and if you're familiar with my channel, you heard me mention his name, you know I have some beef with the guy because I can't remember or recall all the specific examples where he had made bad decisions and overrid someone who had a good decision, who wanted to take a show in a good direction, because there's too numerous to count. This gets worse, particularly in Voyager. As I said, things got worse when Michael Piller and Jeri Taylor left, because for most of TNG, when Michael Piller came in and then Jeri Taylor got elevated to showrunner for Voyager, he would defer to them, he would collaborate with them, but mostly in terms of creative sense would defer to their sensibilities, and as I'll get to later, their sensibilities were really good. They're good writers. However, after season 4 of Voyager, when Jeri Taylor left, Michael Piller had already been pushed out of the show in the season 2 of Voyager, he kind of became more power hungry, and he elevated Brannon Braga to showrunner, but would kind of see him as like someone he could push around and didn't really listen to, and that's why he has a hell of a lot more writing credits in Enterprise. And he also has more, should be noted, story by and teleplay credits in the later seasons of Voyager as well, which I didn't mention because I'm only doing written by credits, but still, he was a hell of a lot more active in later seasons of Voyager and Enterprise, to its detriment. And that's why there was a huge downgrade in the qualities of those shows during this time. And I don't think, and I'll get to Brannon Braga later, but I don't think it's necessarily his fault. I think it's Rick Berman's fault. And because he is not very creative, he is mostly responsible for the episode Endgame, which I think is the worst series finale of all time. And I went on a rant about him when I covered that episode. And so, yeah, and he's just made a lot of bad calls, particularly Voyager, which the reason why that show never took off, and it had potential, it could have been way better, it could have had great story potential for continuity, for character growth, and any sort of serialization continuity. Rick Berman shot down, dead. I mean, and that's the difference with Brannon Braga. I actually wanted to do a season-long story arc in season 4, but Rick Berman said no, and he shot down the fact that 7 of 9 and the Doctor should have gotten together, and all the fans thought so. He said no, and those are just a couple of examples out of countless, where he has made bad calls. Now, that being said, as I said in the pros, Star Trek during this era was amazing. And he deserves some credit for that. I think mostly as a money man, as a producer, as a behind the scenes guy, he did help promote the show and push the show and keep it going. So he does deserve accolades for that. But he is not very creative on the writing side and should leave it to the writers and stop interfering with them. Just, the writers listening to interviews have a lot of story about how Rick Berman would shoot down their good ideas. So, anyway, as I said, there's some examples where those ideas should have been shot down, and he was correct to do so. But I think that from what I hear, the scales tipped the other way. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about Maurice Hurley. Maurice Hurley was the showrunner of Star Trek Next Generation from Season 1 and Season 2. Written by credits are 11001001, The Child, Q Who. He is known for creating the Borg. Pros, improved over Gene Roddenberry, which wasn't too hard to do, but yes. Cons, not character based stories and bland sitcom writing. Now, this is just my humble opinion on Mr. Maurice Hurley, who apparently, there was a lot of infighting in the first 2 seasons of TNG, which a documentary has covered, and a lot of feuding going on, and a lot of people did not like Maurice Hurley, and Maurice Hurley apparently sometimes tried to undermine Gene Roddenberry. And when I watched season 2 recently, and I really sat and analyzed the writing of each episode, I started to notice a pattern that Maurice Hurley was a really bad showrunner, and that he was kind of responsible for this sitcom-ish feel that season 2 had. Like the silly, when people think of season 1 and season 2, they think of like cheesy 80s stuff. Mind you, season 3 was also written in the 80s, yet it didn't feel like a cheesy 80s, because it didn't have to do with that. It had to do with Maurice Hurley. He was bringing that mentality to the show, and definitely listen to specific examples like Up the Long Ladder, which was written by Melinda Snodgrass. She has the writing credit for that episode, but when you hear about Maurice Hurley, his input and what he's like, oh, do it this way and do it that way. He's the one that made a stupid fucking making fun of Irish farmers episode. That's his responsibility. He's the one who always comes up and turns it into like a sitcom-ish thing. And I wondered, like, did this writer work on other sitcoms? And most of his other credits were like other dramas like Miami Vice and whatnot of the 80s. But he's still... From what I understand of those shows, I never really watched them, is that they still have these tropish, these, cliche tropes that, freeze fame. And that's that's what he made Star Trek feel like. So, good riddance to him. When he left, the show got way better. And plus, he hated Dr. Crusher for some reason, brought in Pulaski, which was such a dumb thing to do. And thank God when he left, Crusher came right back. Anyway, so next we'll get into Tracey Torme. It was a staff writer for TNG for seasons 1 and 2. Written by, credits include The Big Goodbye, The Royale, and Manhunt. What should be noted with The Royale and Manhunt, he wanted to, writing credit was a pseudonym. He didn't want his name attached to those episodes. I'm not 100% on The Royale, I'm pretty sure, but I am 100% on Manhunt. He very correctly wanted to get his name away from that piece of shit episode from what Maurice Hurley did with it. Known for making the show grittier, like in Conspiracy, and being in a feud with Maurice Hurley. Pros, strong sci-fi concepts. Cons, doesn't really get Star Trek. Now, that's just my opinion. I don't really have that much to go on, but I'm not a fan of the first 2 seasons overall, so I'm not really a fan of any of the writers during those first 2 seasons. It is known that he was, some people almost called a civil war between him and Maurice Hurley, and a lot of times they were like a power play to who could get Roddenberry's ear or whatnot, and sometimes Maurice Hurley would sabotage Tracey Torme, and it was a whole thing. But don't really care too much about that. Anyway, so let's move on to Hans Beimler. I always want to call him Beimler, but that's my Lower Decks influence. Hans Beimler was a staff writer on TNG for season 2 and 3, and DS9 season 6 and 7. As a writing partner with Richard Manning for TNG and with Ira Steven Behr for DS9. Written by credits: Who Watches the Watchers, Allegiance, Shattered Mirror, Ferengi Love Songs, A Time to Stand, Favor the Bold, Sacrifice of Angels, The Magnificent Ferengi, Wrongs, Darker Than Death or Night, An Image in the Sand, Shadows and Symbols, The Siege of AR-558, Bada Bing Bada Bang, The Changing Face of Evil, and What You Leave Behind. And it should be noted, as I indicated, pretty much all of his TNG credits were co-written with Richard Manning, and pretty much all of his DS9 credits were co-written with Ira Steven Behr. Known for hard-hitting consequence episodes, pros works great with collaborations. Cons, he wrote Bada Bing Bada Bang. Sorry. I know it was with Ira Steven Behr, but I'm still not letting him off the hook for that. And some Ferengi episodes as well. Anyway. So Hans Bindler and Richard Manning as people I noted in season 2 who actually, there's few standout episodes of season 2 that I've noticed were written well, were them. I'm thinking specifically of the episode The Emissary, even though it doesn't, again, they didn't have a written by credit, they were basically responsible for that episode. And also, my research during season 3, they were a big part of what made season 3 really great. They both contributed a lot to episodes like Yesterday's Enterprise, which was a huge collaborative effort, and both of them were very big on that one. Now, apparently, Hans Bindler and Richard Manning both quit at the end of season 3, as did Ira Steven Behr, because they were fed up with Michael Piller. But apparently, Ira Steven Behr, his writing partner in DS9, quit at the end of season 5, so he needed another one. So I'm just speculating, I didn't hear this specifically, but it seems to me he asked Hans Bindler, whom he knew from his time with working with him on season 3 of TNG, to come be his writing partner for 6 and 7 of DS9, and as you can see, they did some really good work, such as Favor of the Bold, Sacrifice of Angel, Magnificent Ferengi, actually a good Ferengi episode, but of course they, and What You Leave Behind, the final episode, very good. As I said, they did write Bada Bing Bada Bang, so not all of it, but I blame Ira Steven Behr more for that. But overall, I think this was a really solid, really good writer. So next we'll get into Melinda Snodgrass. Was a staff writer for TNG seasons 2 and 3. Written by credits: The Measure of a Man, Up the Long Ladder, The Instance of Command, The High Ground. Known for understanding and writing for Data. Pros: Understanding Data, wrote Measure of the Man, and rewrote The Offspring. Uncredited rewrite on The Offspring. Cons: prefers TOS, didn't get along with Michael Piller. So, Melinda Snodgrass is someone I do know a lot about because she has done a lot of interviews about her time on Star Trek, and she even she released on her website her original draft for The Instance of Command, which she much preferred, and she was very upset that Gene Roddenberry or Rick Berman, I think it was Rick Berman actually, made them rewrite it so Data didn't have a romance, which is what Gene Roddenberry originally wanted, and they made it, and I think it was Brent Spiner complained about it, and she was very upset, and I read her original version, and you know what, I liked it better. Now, with The Offspring, Rene Echevarria, who I'll talk about later, is the credited writer for that episode, but even he, in his own commentary and many interviews, pointed out that his original concept for The Offspring was rewritten heavily, and he said it was mainly by Melinda Snodgrass and Michael Piller, and he said they were very gracious to let him keep the written by credit, even though his original version barely resembles the finished product, and he does give credit to Melinda Snodgrass for doing most of the work and making that episode as good as it was, and Melinda Snodgrass herself pointed out that The Offspring, even though she's not credited for it, is one of the episodes she's most proud of doing, that along with Measure of a Man. She does prefer Measure of Man, but that's just because she wrote it, and I think she's wrong, but that's okay. But but you can kind of tell because those two episodes are very similar. She brings that she used to be a practicing lawyer, which is why she has the Measure of Man thing, the trial, and that's sort of the angle she's coming at. Again, a lot of interviews, I know that she got along very well with Maurice Hurley. Again, I can't, give her credit for that, for having good taste, but apparently he was a better, easier guy to get along with, but did not get along well at all with Michael Piller, which is why she quit at the end of season 3. And she, to this day, says that she thinks the original series is better. Well, just because she's a good writer doesn't mean she can be right, I suppose. She still is wrong about that. Anyway, good writer there, definitely. Again, strength of season 3. Okay, so next we will get into the man himself. I've mentioned several times already, Michael Piller. He was the showrunner of TNG seasons 3 through 6, DS9 seasons 1 and 2, Voyager seasons 1 and 2. Written by credits: The Enemy, The Best of Both Worlds, Parts 1 and 2, First Contact, the episode, The Siege, The Basics, Parts 1 and 2, and Star Trek Insurrection. Known for turning TNG around and making it a great show. Co-creating DS9 and Voyager, being a great showrunner, but not very personable, being pushed out of Voyager for pushing serialization, which is what they should have fucking done, but more on that later. Pros: great at character stories. He knows to make that the focus of the show. Great showrunner. Great with shaping good stories. Cons: can make a few bad decisions, such as putting Worf and Troy together. I'm currently covering season 7 at the moment and just watched a couple episodes with that and did my research and seeing that was Michael Piller's idea, even though Rene Echevarria very correctly wanted to put Riker and Troy together, but Michael Piller overrode him on that. So, and there's other bad decisions he's made, but I think the good decisions do very much far outweigh the bads, and I do think that the Star Trek franchise lost something when they pushed out Michael Piller, and I think it was a huge mistake doing that. I already mentioned about how Rick Berman started becoming out of control after he left, so it was just a bad thing for the franchise, and it was a good thing when he came. He saved. I am totally of the opinion that had not Michael Piller come, then TNG would have not lasted 7 seasons. It would have been seen as a failure. No one would be talking about it now, and DS9, Voyager, and all the other Star Trek shows would not exist. Star Trek would die as a franchise. That Michael Piller single-handedly saved it. Now, he didn't like being called the savior of Star Trek, but many people, like Ira Steven Behr, do call him that, and I think they're correct to do so. I did a whole video about him that was like an hour and a half long, so I won't talk about him anymore. You can check it out if you want to hear my more thoughts on that. So I instead will get to the next writer, whom I will talk about, which is Ronald D Moore. Staff writer on TNG seasons 3 through 7, DS9 seasons 3 through 7. Would often partner up with Brannon Braga. Written by credits: The Bonding, The Defector, Family, In Theory, Redemption, Parts 1 and 2, First Duty, The Next Phase, Relics, Tapestry, The Pegasus, Journey's End, All Good Things, Star Trek Generations, Star Trek First Contact, Defiant, The Die Is Cast, Sons of Moog, Looking for Parmok in All the Wrong Places, Soldiers of the Empire, Rocks and Shawls, You Are Cordially Invited, Waltz, Change of Heart, Valiant, Take Me Out to the Holosuites, Once More Unto the Breach, Inter Armin Emin Silent Legis, Strange Bedfellows, Tacking Into the Wind, Survival Instinct. Known as the Klingon guy, and known for long-term serialization storytelling, great continuity character stories. Pros: great at continuity, great with long-term storytelling and world building. Cons: has a tendency to retcon characters, tends to make sharp, inconsistent character changes in order to keep things fresh. And that observation is not limited to Star Trek. He's gone on to do that in other shows, I believe, like Battlestar Galactica. I think that is a negative signature from him. The example in Star Trek is the whole thing with making Bashir genetically enhanced. I think he just, and in Voyager, he said in that episode where they said that Harry Kim was from the Delta Quadrant, he said that they wished they would have done that. Oh, in one stage he wanted to make Kira Cardassian in that episode where she just pretended to be one. So, no. So he wasn't, sometimes the showrunners hold him back from doing these drastic out of character mistakes, but sometimes they let him get away with it. And he has that tendency. But overall, great writer. I first heard about him when I was 14. I looked him up in school and it pinpointed him as one of my favorite writers of Star Trek because I was really into the Klingon episodes, Reunion, Redemption, all that. And he was responsible for all that. Since the father, he was known as a Klingon guy. You might have noticed in my written by credits that a lot of Klingon episodes in there. And he said that he himself never really thought of himself as like the Klingon guy, or that's just what he became because he just got invested in writing that storyline. But I think it's just because he likes to do those long-term stories. Like, he's a champion of serialization. There's the whole story about when when DS9 finished, he tried to go over the Voyager and only lasted 2 episodes and rage quit because he was frustrated that no one was willing to take the show in new, fresh directions or keep up continuity, and he just couldn't deal with that. And of course, he's very well known now for being the showrunner of shows like Battlestar Galactica and For All Mankind. But yeah, overall, I do think he's absolutely a great writer. Part of the reason why Deep Space Nine got better and Voyager kind of didn't is because writers like him went to Deep Space Nine. But to be fair, he did fit in there better, I think. Anyway, so next we will move over to Ira Steven Behr. Staff writer for TNG Season 3, DS9 Seasons 1 and 2. Showrunner for DS9 Seasons 3 through 7. Writing partner with Robert Hewitt Wolfe for DS9 Seasons 1 through 5 and Hans Beimler for DS9 Seasons 6 and 7. Written by credits: Captain's Holiday, The Jem'Hadar, Heart of Stone, Prophet Motive, Through the Looking Glass, The Way of the Warrior, Homefront, Shattered Mirror, To the Death, Apocalypse Rising, Let He Who Is Without Sin, The Ascent, In Purgatory's Shadow, By Inferno's Light, Ferengi Love Songs, Call to Arms, A Time to Stand, Favor the Bold, Sacrifice of Angels, The Magnificent Ferengis, Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night, His Way, Prophet and Lace, Tears of the Prophets, Image in the Sand, Shadows and Symbols, The Siege of AR-558, The Emperor's New Cloak, Bada Bing Bada Bang, The Changing Face of Evil, What You Leave Behind. Known for being the showrunner of DS9, influenced heavily by classic films and big band style music, known as the Riser writer and keeper of the Ferengi storyline, wanted to explore the darker side of Roddenberry's vision. Pros: great showrunner, overall saw one of the greatest Star Trek shows and wasn't afraid to take chances. Cons: didn't really get Roddenberry's vision and sometimes would go too far against it, and this weird obsession with turning DS9 into a fantasy where Sisko was a god had an outdated sense of humor that resulted in some of the worst episodes of the show, particularly with the Ferengi, and Vic Fontaine was too self-indulgent in his love of classic films and Vegas lounge singers. Tell what really bothers me about it. You know, it's funny, I watched an interview with Ira Steven Behr, and he was like, you know what, I fucking like Vic Fontaine. I think James Darren is a treasure, and he's a great character, and, you know, I can't believe, you know, people actually don't like him and think I shouldn't have him in the show. They're like, yeah, screw those people, it's my show, I do what I want. And I had this instinctual reaction, but yeah, screw those people, do what you want. And I was like, wait a second, I'm those people, and those people are right. You're wrong. The Vegas Star Trek Deep Space Nine is not a fucking variety show. But anyway, sorry. Not getting into my hatred of Vic Fontaine. Yeah, and he's a Ferengi. He loved the Ferengi. He's Profit and Lace was one of those episodes that he wrote, and he thought it was the funniest thing ever. So yeah, that's a huge con for him. He obviously has no sense of humor. He is too obsessed with like classic films. I'm sorry, just a little bit too much. And yeah, he didn't get Roddenberry's vision. Don't get me wrong, I love DS9's darker tones, but there's sometimes, and I think Rick Berman did hold him back, thankfully, but sometimes he wanted to take things too far. And if you watch the documentary where they did that mythical season 8, and he wrote so that the Starfleet were like, a bunch of atheists who wanted to outlaw religion or some bullshit, and I'm like, and made Dr. Bashir the head of Section 31. I'm like, glad he's not writing for DS9 anymore. And also the thing is, with that mythical season 8, like Rick Berman and other producers were there to keep him in check. So it does make me feel like, yeah. And he often spoke out, like specifically against Roddenberry's vision, saying it's totally unbelievable and it's a bunch of bullshit and that's not how the world works. I disagree. I think that's the whole point of Star Trek. But that being said, I don't mind when he skirts that vision with episodes like In the Pale Moonlight and stuff like that, which are fucking brilliant. But yeah, sometimes he would take it too far. And yeah, he's a great showrunner. I have to give him credit for that. But some of his negative influences did result in some of the show's worst episodes. Anyway, next we'll move on to Jeri Taylor, staff writer for TNG seasons 4 through 6, showrunner TNG season 7, Voyager seasons 1 through 4, co-showrunner with Biller for seasons 1 and 2. Written by credits: The Drumhead, The Outcast, The 37s, Persistence of Vision, Alliances, Resolutions, Coda, Day of Honor, Hunters 1. Known for a mentor to the younger writers, many of them actually referred to as the mother of the writer's room. Great at character stories and adding a female perspective to a mostly male writer's room. Co-created Voyager, was a champion for Janeway as a hero. Pros: great at character stories and social commentary. Cons: champions some bad episodes like Sub Rosa and Coda. Both of which, and I know very sadly she's no longer with us, which is a very recent affair, so that does suck. But before her passing, she still defended both Sub Rosa and Coda. I don't know about Sub Rosa, but definitely Coda. God, those episodes are some of the worst of the entire franchise. I do blame her for Sub Rosa, even though Brannon Braga was the credited writer. He was just assigned to it. She's the one that like pushed it, like bought the story idea and like pushed it and said, let's do this, and seemed to be oblivious that it was one of the worst episodes of the show. And Coda was also like just a jumbled mess, and she tried to be like, oh yeah, that was a great episode. But I actually do like her writing style, like The Drumhead, great episode, and there's other episodes that she doesn't have a full written by credit, but she, whenever I see her name, tends to be a really good episode. So I think she is one of the strongest writers of Star Trek, and apparently a really good showrunner as well. Alright, so next we will get into Joe Menosky, staff writer for TNG seasons 4 and 5, Voyager seasons 3 through 6, Discovery season 1. Would often partner up with Brannon Braga on Voyager. Written by credits: Legacy, The Nth Degree, In Theory, Suspicions, Interface, Masks, Dramatis Personae, Future's End, Parts 1 and 2, Alter Ego, Distant Origin, Scorpion, Parts 1 and 2, The Gift, Year of Hell, Parts 1 and 2, The Killing Game, Parts 1 and 2, Night, Dark Frontier, The Voyager Conspiracy, Muse, and Lethe. Known for writing mostly character-based stories and being a bit eccentric, not doing interviews and writing remotely. Apparently, a lot of his time on Voyager and some on TNG, he was living in the Alps in France and was sending in scripts remotely. Mind you, this is before the days of Skype. I think sometimes he would be on the phone, like on the speakerphone or something, though. Pros. Some strong character stories. Is mostly known for Darmok, but co-wrote some great episodes with Brannon Braga, such as Scorpion and A Year of Hell. Cons. Does not care about continuity, as specifically said in interviews that he doesn't care about continuity. Also, he doesn't care about logic consistency, and thus is prone to have many plot holes in his scripts and doesn't stay consistent with the characters. Darmok, prime example. Great episode, everyone loves it. Giant plot hole. The whole language doesn't make any sense, but he doesn't care. And that he's tend to known, like when people have, there's been other examples that people brought up where he got overruled, where they'd be like, well, that doesn't actually make any sense. How could that happen logically? And his response would be, who cares? Honestly, to me, that is the mark of a lazy writer. That is like the definition of a lazy writer, I should say. Someone who's like, well, I don't give a fuck about continuity. Who cares that I'm benefiting off of these characters and these franchises that existed for years and years, and it's making it easier for me to write because I can just take everything that's already established and then be like, yeah, fuck that's established, not give a shit about it, not respect it at all, and also not care about fucking logic and how things actually work and be like, oh, fuck it, I'll just do whatever the fuck I want to make a great story. And the thing is, there are some stories that he wrote that I like, but he's actually one of the writers when I see his name on the script, and if I don't like the episode, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense, because he tends to not be a writer that I like. His style, is something that I think is lazy. I think his style is lazy. Now, he does have some good ideas and throwing that there, but I do think most of his best work is when he is partnered with Brannon Braga. And I'll get to him later, but Brannon Braga needs a writing partner. But, so he's not one of my favorite writers. Anyway, speaking of the man, we'll get to the next writer, Brannon Braga. Often would partner up with Ronald D Moore for TNG and Joe Menosky for Voyager. Staff writer for TNG seasons 4 through 7, Voyager seasons 1 through 4, showrunner Voyager season 5 and 6, Enterprise seasons 1 through 3. Written by credits: Identity Crisis, Cause and Effect, Realm of Fear, Birthright Part 1, Frame of Mind, Timescape, Phantasms, Parallels, Genesis, All Good Things, Star Trek Generations, Star Trek First Contact, Emanations, The 37s, Projections, Non Sequitur, Deadlock, Flashback, Future's End Parts 1 and 2, Macrochrasm, Distant Origin, Scorpion Parts 1 and 2, Year of Hell Parts 1 and 2, Prey, The Killing Games Parts 1 and 2, Night, Dark Frontier, Broken Bow, Fight or Flight, Unexpected, Shuttlepod 1, Shockwave Parts 1 and 2, A Night in Sick Bay, The Seventh, Stigma, Cogenitor, The Expanse, The Zindi, Carpenter Street, 0 Hour, and These Are the Voyages. Known for strange, mind-bending, and weird sci-fi concepts such as time manipulation and body horror, as a high-concept guy, co-created Star Trek Enterprise. Pros: wrote some of the best high-concept and horror episodes, was great at mind-bending storylines, worked really well when paired with another writer who was better at character stories like Ronald D Moore or Joe Menosky. Cons: was a terrible showrunner. Was terrible when paired with Rick Berman or Kenneth Biller. Neither knows how to write good character stories. Had this weird obsession with 50s/60s era astronauts. Tried to shove it into Star Trek where it didn't belong. Now, Now, this started towards the end of Voyager with episodes like One Small Step, which I hated that episode. It was boring, and they're like, oh, let's make the next Star Trek show all like that, and let's have it all be about astronauts. Now, thankfully, the studio interfered and be like, no, that's a stupid idea, that's boring. Star Trek is not about the right stuff, astronauts on Earth trying to get the ship going. That's not a Star Trek show. But unfortunately, the studio didn't push them hard enough, and thus we got the first 2 boring-ass seasons of Enterprise, where I do believe, as I said, Rick Berman gets a lot of blame for that, but Brannon Braga has his share of blame as well, because he's the one who pushed that 50s, 60s astronaut style, that's not what Star Trek is like. That's not what I want out of Star Trek. That is not Star Trek. That being said, Brannon Braga wrote some of the best episodes, as I just mentioned, of TNG and Voyager. He's personally responsible for great episodes like Timescape, Frame of Mind, some of the best episodes, Parallels, All Good Things with Ronald D Moore, to be fair, and Year of Hell, and Scorpion was with Joe Menosky. But again, it's like when he's paired with another writer who's good at characters, which he's not really, that's when things really get great. But when he's paired with someone who doesn't understand writing, like fucking characters like Rick Berman, things get even worse. And when you get fucking Endgame and you get the first 2 seasons of Enterprise. But yeah, so, and Deadlocked, that's another one of his great episodes. So yeah, so Brannon Braga is a great writer, but he's a great collaborative writer. He's great in the writer's room. He's great in the collaborative writer's effort. I don't think he was a good showrunner. But again, that is just my opinion off of what little information I have. As I mentioned before, I was not in the writer's room, but that is my impression. Anyway, next we'll get into Rene Echevarria, staff writer for TNG Seasons 6 and 7, DS9 Seasons 3 through 7, written by credits The Offspring, Transfigurations, I, Borg, True Q, Ship in a Bottle, Birthright Part 2, Descent Part 2, Explorers, Facets, Crossfire, The Begotten, A Simple Investigation, Behind the Lines, After Image, Chrysales, Covenant, Chimera, and Penumbra. Known for emotional or sentimental stories, typically with a melancholy feel to it. Prose writes some of the most emotional, powerful episodes that really hits the feels. Cons can sometimes miss the mark and write a sappy episode. Now, I really like Rene Echevarria. He is definitely one of my favorite writers. He's also had a teleplay credit on The Mind's Eye, which is another one of the best episodes. So his writing credits were really hitting out of the park at first with The Offspring, Transfiguration, The Mind's Eye, and I, Borg. All amazingly strong. Like, he's really good at the character stuff, at the emotional stuff, at the drama, like it's sentimental. True Q is another good episode, another underrated episode. Ship in the Bottle, amazing. But then, then he starts having some bad credits like Explorers and Crossfire. So it doesn't always, always hit the mark, as I said. But and it's funny that the episode he wrote in DS9 for the station takeover story arc was Behind the Lines, because that's probably one of my favorites. Sacrifice of Angels is my favorite, but that's my second favorite because, again, it's a great character story. It's just emotional. It's in the feel. So I think he definitely benefited DS9, and I do think it's a shame that it seemed, from my humble opinion, when TNG ended, Rene Echevarria and Ronald D Moore went to the DS9, and Brannon Braga and Joe Menosky went to Voyager. I think DS9 got the better writers, and Voyager got the worst writers, which unfortunately, not that, Brannon Braga is totally terrible, but still, I think that Rene Echevarria and Ronald D Moore were the better writers, and they both went to DS9, so I think, as much as I love DS9 for that, I almost wish that one of them had went to Voyager, so maybe Voyager would have been better. And maybe they should have maybe with Ronald D Moore, and they should have made him the showrunner of Voyager when Jeri Taylor left, and not fucking Brannon Braga. Like, Ronald D Moore proved with Battlestar Galactica and other shows that he's a much better showrunner than Brannon Braga, and maybe we wouldn't have gotten Enterprise as the 5th show. We would have actually gotten a good, like, Battlestar Galactica Ronald D Moore show. God, that would have been so amazing. But then again, Rick Berman would have to step his ego aside, which he probably wasn't willing to do. Oh, fuck that guy. Anyway, I can dream. Anyway, sorry. Getting off tangent here. Next writer is Naren Shankar. Staff writer for TNG seasons 6 and 7. Written by credits are The First Duty, The Quality of Life, Suspicions, Force of Nature, and The Quickening. Started out as a science advisor, known for using science ideas as a jumping off point, but stories tend to be darker and grittier. Prose writes great dark character stories. Cons doesn't always get Star Trek. I kind of struggled with the cons for him. I was like, yeah, maybe sometimes doesn't always. Like, Suspicions is not a good episode, but he wrote that with Joe Menosky, to be fair, so it's kind of his fault. But anyway, he wrote some really strong, hard-hitting episodes. The Quickening is the only one he wrote for DS9, one of my favorite DS9 episodes. But yeah, he was and it's funny because with him, Rene Echevarria, and Ronald D Moore being the main writers, along with Brannon Braga being the main writers of season 7, and season 6, it's no doubt that those seasons had a much, much darker tone than the other show, which is great, which I think really benefited the show. But Naren Shankar, outside of Star Trek, of course, is known most for being the showrunner of The Expanse. I mean, he was also the showrunner of CSI, which is a much popular show, but who cares about that? And that's where I knew him from originally. I didn't even know he wrote for Star Trek until someone pointed out. I was like, oh, really? He wrote for TNG? Didn't even know that. But he would go on to do great things with The Outer Limits and then The Expanse. So, yeah. Anyway, next writer is Peter Allen Fields. He was a staff writer for DS9 seasons 1 and 2. Written by credits: Cost of Living, Progress, The Circle, Necessary Evil, For the Uniform. Known for strong, dramatic character stories as well as big, chaotic, comedic scenes involving a lot of people. Prose: has a writing credit on some of the very best Star Trek episodes, including The Inner Light, Duet, and In the Pale Moonlight. Cons: Progress was a massive misstep. And I railed against that episode, and Peter Allen Field's original idea for that episode kind of seemed worse. But, I had to single Peter Allen Fields out because his name kept turning up in all my favorite episodes. Now, for The Inner Light, he had a teleplay credit, which, could mean anything. It could mean he essentially wrote the episode, or it could mean he barely had any input in it. And it does seem that, from interviews, Morgan Gindel was mainly responsible for that episode, and who had the story by credit. And Peter Allen Fields mostly just spruced up the script, crossed the T's, dotted the I's, but also added in some scenes with Picard and Helene. But it was mostly Morgan Gindel's thing. But still, he was involved with it. In The Pale Moonlight, he just had a story by credit. And I know the original idea for In the Pale Moonlight was very different. It had to do with Shakar and Jake. I don't know if that was his original idea or if he helped define the idea to what it eventually became. I'm not sure. All I know is he has a story by credit, but still, his name is on one of the best Star Trek episodes ever made. Speaking of which, Duet, he has the teleplay credit, and that he is known as being more directly responsible for. He is known as the writer of that episode. Nana Visitor was specifically praising him, and so was the director of that episode, whose name I'm blanking on, but he was also praising Peter Allen Field specifically in Duet. This is one of the best written episodes of the entire franchise. It's a masterpiece in writing. So for that alone, I have to say Peter Allen Fields is an absolutely amazing writer. I also didn't mention, because he didn't have a written credit for it, was Half Alive, which was the first good Luoxana Troy episode, and then he wrote Cost of Living after that, so he did like 2 Luoxana episodes in a row, which I think Cost of Living was okay. Both Cost of Living and The Circle had a scene that was essentially the same, where a bunch of people came in the room and were like very chaotic and starting to talk at the same time. He improved upon that. Like, the one in Cost of Living was just okay, but the one in The Circle was perfect. It was beautiful. So he kind of improved upon that. Anyway, next writer I'll get to is Robert Hewitt Wolfe. He's a staff writer for DS9 seasons 1 through 5. Mostly worked as Ira Steven Behr's writing partner. Written by credits: In the Hands of the Prophets, Shadow Play, The Wire, Second Skin, Heart of Stone, Prophet Motive, Through the Looking Glass, Family Business, The Adversary, The Way of the Warrior, Home Front, To the Death, Apocalypse Rising, Let He Who Is Without Sin, The Ascent, In Purgatory, Shadow, By Inferno's Light, Blaze of Glory, Call to Arms, Field of Fire. Known for being Ira Steven Behr's writing partner and Rock, Prose wrote some great character stories for Trek and was great at writing suspense. Cons also worked on a lot of terrible Ferengi episodes. That's, just the consequence of being Ira Steven Behr's writing partner. Robert Hewitt Wolfe, I don't know if I really firmly got his voice down, but I do know, it was his idea to have Jake not join Starfleet because he based that off of his own life. I think that was a mistake for the show as well, but it kind of made sense for the episode. And, and I've seen him in some interviews. He seemed like a really nice guy. He seemed to have, a firm understanding of Star Trek and love for Deep Space Nine. And, he also wrote Let He Who Is Without Sin. That's another giant misstep. But, overall, I thought he was okay. Okay as a writer. Anyway, so we'll get to the next writer, which is Kenneth Biller, staff writer for Voyager seasons 1 through 6. Showrunner, Voyager season 7. Written by credits: Initiations, Maneuvers, Life Signs, Unity, Before and After, Worst Case Scenario, Nemesis, Random Thoughts, Extreme Risk. Known for being the showrunner of Season 7 of Voyager, Prose wrote some strong episodes like Life Signs and Nemesis. Cons: appears to be a bad writer and part of the problem of why Voyager failed in the later seasons. He complained about Michael Piller and was part of those that pushed him out, as he hated serialized storytelling. He did a terrible job as a showrunner in the final season, and he helped Rick Berman write the disgrace known as Endgame. Now, I haven't really studied or that closely Voyager because I haven't gotten to Voyager yet in my rewatch through. I'm still at, towards the end of TNG and the beginning of DS9, so it hasn't even started Voyager yet, so I'm not going to be as familiar with these Voyager and Enterprise writers that I'm about to get into. But, again, just basing it off of what I know of Kenneth Biller and what I know from the episodes he wrote, it seems like he sucks. It seems like he's part of the problem with Voyager. Because, I read a quote from him that really rubbed me the wrong way. Because I was really pissed off that Michael Piller was pushed out of the show in season 2. And Kenneth Biller seemed to be one of the people behind that. Because he had a quote about how the episode Life Signs, which I just mentioned was a great episode. He's like, I wrote this great episode. It's amazing. But it can't stand on its own now because there'll be some scene about a Kazon spy that's thrown in my episode and totally ruins it. Now, the one thing I'll say about that comment, that comment did not age well, because that's all modern TV show is. Modern TV shows do have standalone episodes, but elements that connect to the wider story. That's what every practically every fucking show does. So Michael Piller was actually a visionary by fucking doing that, and they should have embraced the serialized storytelling more, but this fuckhead. And you know, part of the other reason why, I'm sorry, I don't mean to get insulting, because I don't know him. I'm just basing it off of what I know, but he was the showrunner for season 7 of Voyager, which is one of the worst seasons of Voyager. That season was appalling. It's clear to me that he is not a good writer, does not know good character stories. Oh, and on top of that, he's the person who helped Rick Berman write Endgame. Need I say anymore? I don't think I need. Anyway, sorry. Next, I'll get into Bryan Fuller, staff writer for Voyager seasons 4 through 7. Written by credits Mortal Coil, Spirit Folk, Workforce Part 1, Friendship 1. Known for being the creator of Star Trek Discovery, who left the project early on before writing really started. Prose has a bit of a dark side. Cons seems to have contributed to the blandness of the final season of Voyager. Again, I don't really know much about Bryan Fuller. I do know that he went to be the showrunner for Hannibal, which was a very popular show, and so that's why he got chosen to do Discovery. But apparently, I don't know why. Maybe I'll research this when I rewatch Discovery eventually. But he, I believe, was fired, was pushed out, and there was some controversy around him. And so he just came up with the initial idea, and what's his face? I was going to say Rick Berman, but no, Alex Kurtzman probably just took Discovery in a totally different direction, and eventually went in later seasons, so it eventually became totally different than his original idea, but he still has creator credit, probably for legal reasons. But yeah, I remember when he was announced to be the creator of Discovery, they're like, oh, he was a writer on Voyager. And I was like, oh, was he? I didn't know. What episodes did he write? Spirit Folk? Great. I'm sure he was great. No, but to be fair, Spirit Folk is terrible, but he wrote some other good episodes like Workforce and Mortal Coil, and I'm sure there's others that teleplay that I'm not even looking at. So, I don't know, he seemed okay to me. I just don't know him that well. Anyway, next writer is Michael Taylor, staff writer on Voyager seasons 5 through 7. Written by credits include The Visitor, Things Past, Resurrection, Once Upon a Time, Counterpoint, Drive, Friendship 1. Known for character dramas. Prose seems to write emotionally powerful episodes like The Visitor. Cons worked on some bland episodes of season 7 of Voyager, which I guess is a side effect for anyone who was working on season 7 of Voyager. But yeah, I vaguely heard of Michael Taylor. Again, not hugely familiar. As you can tell, he did write for some episodes as a freelancer for DS9 before he became in earlier seasons of Voyager, before he became a staff writer in the later seasons of Voyager. As I said, The Visitor and Things Past, not shabby credits, great episodes, and it does seem and Counterpoint, one of my favorite season 5 Voyager episodes, the back and forth between Janeway. So it does seem like he was a good writer for what it's worth. Anyway, next writer is Mike Sussman, staff writer for Voyager season 7 and Enterprise seasons 1 through 4. Written by credits include The Swarm, Civilization, Dead Stop, Future Tense, Regeneration, Anomaly, Twilight, E Squared, Home, The Augments, Kirshara, Babel 1, In the Mirror Darkly Parts 1 and 2. Known for a TOS fan who always wondered where the ship the Defiant from the Tholian Web ended up. Prose understands Star Trek, one of the better writers on Enterprise, responsible for a lot of the good episodes in the earlier seasons. Cons wrote The Swarm and some of Voyager's lesser episodes. And again, I'm just going off of his writing credits because I am kind of familiar with him. I did see a couple interviews with him about Enterprise where he talked about the episode Future Tense, where he's like, his original idea was to make the future ship be the Defiant, or show where the Defiant went to from the episode Dolian Web, which obviously they would end up doing in the two-parter In the Mirror Darkly, which he was very proud of, so he was kind of fanboying out. So I can tell from that in his interviews he was a TOS fanboy and brought, like, some of his early Enterprise credits are actually some of the good episodes of the earlier seasons: Future Tense, Regeneration, Twilight, like these, yeah, so these, he seems like a really good writer to me. That's all I'm saying, just based off of that. Anyway, next writer we'll get to is Andre Bormanis, staff writer for Enterprise seasons 1 through 4. Written by credits: Waking Moments, Silent Enemy, Horizon, Extinction, Countdown, Awakening, Babel 1. Known for being a scientist and the science advisor for TNG and Voyager. Pros: learned the ways of Star Trek from his time being a science advisor. Cons: he wrote Extinction. And again, I only know him as a science advisor. I've seen a couple episodes where he talked about the science of Star Trek. I didn't even know he wrote for Enterprise. And it seems like he wrote Countdown. That's an amazing episode. So, and Babel 1 is pretty good. So is Awakening. So, yeah, I mean, Horizon kind of sucks. And Silent Enemy, the pineapple thing was stupid. But, oh, and Waking Moments for Voyager. That's a good episode, too. So, seems like a good writer to me. Seems like a solid dude. Anyway, next we'll get to Manny Cotto. Good old Manny Cotto, staff writer for Enterprise Season 3, showrunner for Enterprise Season 4. Written by credits include Similitude, Chosen Realm, The Council, Stormfront Parts 1 and 2, Bound, and Demons. Known for saving Enterprise and getting Star Trek, like understanding, like he gets it, unlike the previous Enterprise showrunners. Pros: gets Star Trek, came in and made Season 3 much better and made Season 4 the prequel series that Enterprise should have always been. And by the way, that's just not just me saying that. Brannon Braga also said that. Cons: feels the need to explain away what are clearly production decisions by coming up with in-universe excuses. Now, the most infamous one was the whole Klingon thing, and it was a genetically engineered virus, which is why they look like humans for the TOS. But that's not the only one. He actually did that several times during Season 4. And that is a very annoying trait, which pisses me off. And that Klingon example is one of the things that pissed me off the most. That being said, I think his pros definitely far outweigh that one con. And referencing con as well. But sorry. And because he gets Star Trek. Like, he came in Enterprise Season 3, in the middle of Season 3, and then Season 3 got better, and they started, from what I understand, giving him more and more power because they could see that he was a really good writer and good showrunner and got it. And eventually the studio wisely didn't like Rick Berman and pushed him and Brannon Braga out and made Manny Cotto the showrunner, and Enterprise was all the better for it. Like, Enterprise Season 4 is an amazing season, and what Brannon Braga and Rick Berman wanted to do in Season 4 is to have the whole season take place in an alternate past with Nazis. That was their plan. The whole season was going to take place there. And Manny Cotto was like such a good writer, he was able to be like, no, that's a stupid idea, but I'm not just, you already set it up, so I can't just pretend it doesn't exist or wipe it clean in a second. I'll do a two-parter, explaining it away, and then get back to what I want to do. That's the mark of a good showrunner. Like, he was amazing. He should have been the showrunner from Enterprise from the very beginning. Anyway, final writer, or writers, I should say, that I'll get into is Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens. So it's a married couple, in case you're wondering. Staff writers for Enterprise Season 4. They're written by credits: The Forge, Observer Effect, and Divergence. Known for Star Trek novelists who wrote such novels as Federation, Prime Directive, and the collabs they did with Shatner for his Trek books. Pros: Star Trek fans who understand Star Trek and brought their knowledge to Enterprise. Cons: can bit a bit over the top and helped Cotto with his in-universe explanation of why TOS Klingons look like humans. So I recognize their names from novels. I read some of their novels, like Federation, and then years later I saw them in behind the scenes of Enterprise. Like, holy shit, they actually wrote for Enterprise. That's cool. Because I always thought of Star Trek novels as like, B canon, this separate thing that nobody really gives a shit about, and it's just fanboys and fangirls, fanning out and writing silly shit that is kind of fun to occupy time, but not really Star Trek. But then they actually became writers. They were actually writing for the show. I thought they're not the first ones to do that. There was also Michael Jan Friedman, who was a well-known Star Trek writer who wrote an episode of Voyager Resistance, which I actually really loved that episode. So this is not the first time, but still, I hate those Shatner books though. But again, that's a whole nother thing. But then I thought that was cool that they actually, and I feel like that was Manny Cotto's doing that, because apparently when Brannon Braga and Rick Berman were running the show, they wouldn't hire, like being a Star Trek fan was a negative, like they would not hire you if they found out you were a Star Trek fan. But Manny Cotto, huge Star Trek fan, is like, come on in, Star Trek fans, and you get a lot of great episodes of fanboying out, like fucking In the Mirror Darkly. I mean, come on. That was very interesting. Anyway, I've reached the end, my friend. Those are all of the particular writers that I cared to cover. Now, of course, there are tons more, which I did not mention, but those are the ones that I particularly found noteworthy, or at least that I knew something about. As I said, the Voyager and Enterprise ones I didn't really know much about, so I tried to pick the most prominent ones. But so I hope you enjoyed my run through of the people who make Star Trek great. And as I said, I do apologize for any opinions that, especially towards Mr. Biller there. No hard feelings. I just don't like your scripts. Or Mr. Braga or Mr. Berman, it's just my humble opinion and nothing personal, just talking about the work and giving my opinions on, But no, I do definitely have writers that I gravitate towards. I think you could notice like Rene Echevarria, Ronald D Moore, Peter Allen Fields definitely, but he's sadly passed away. Very sad. Oh, and speaking of sadly passing away, also Jeri Taylor, also an amazing writer. So there's definitely, and you get a feel, and Manny Cotto, of course, the savior of season 3, and Michael Piller is the savior of all of Star Trek. Like, he saved the franchise. Like, you thank Michael Piller for why Star Trek franchise is such a thing. It would have been nothing but TOS and a couple of seasons of a forgotten show that sucked and never got good if it wasn't for Michael Piller. So, yes, he's the reason why. I mean, it was his idea to create Deep Space Nine, and then he collaborated with Jeri Taylor to create Voyager. Like, it's amazing. But anyway, a lot of good writers. Some maybe I don't care for as much, but got into all of that, and you can feel free to leave your comments on some of these writers if you're aware, and maybe throw in some details I got wrong. As I say, I don't know everything. Just go by the reviews and maybe enlighten me on some other details I might have missed, particularly when it comes to some of these later Voyager and Enterprise writers that I didn't really know much about. But anyway, so that is it. Thanks to Kyrie091 for suggesting this video. And hope you enjoyed and hope you enjoyed watching this. If you also would like to request videos like that, you can support me on Patreon. There's different tiers. Even if you don't want to do the higher tier, which is the request a video, you can do lower tiers where you get access to video series I do exclusively for Patreon supporters and other goodies and stuff like that. You can check out in the description below if you're so inclined. If you're not so inclined, that's perfectly well and you still like what I do and you still want to support me, you can definitely do so by leaving a like, subscribing, leaving a comment, all that stuff. Also really helps me out. And just thank you so much for watching this, and see you next time.